Have you ever watched someone spill a cup of coffee just to watch another person clean it, not because the table was dirty, but because power needs to be fed, because humiliation is a meal some people never stop eating? And if it were your wife standing there shaking, would you say nothing? Or would you say the one sentence that could cost you everything? You should apologize. That's the moment that split my life in two, right there on a marble floor so glossy it looked like ice in a glass tower that sat over the city like a crown no one else was allowed to touch. They called it Richard Blackwell's Palace, and if you worked there, you learned fast that silence wasn't peace, it was policy. Be unseen, be unheard. Above all, never ever defy him. Richard was the kind of billionaire people lower their voice to talk about, the kind who never had to raise his, because a quiet word from him could empty a calendar, close a door, end a career. My wife Elena cleaned that penthouse with hands that never shook until that night, hands that kept our rent paid and our lights on when mine were covered in grease at a job that could disappear in a blink. I was a mechanic without a garage, a pair of good hands out of place in rooms where the windows reached higher than most people's hopes. I only came to walk her home, boots scuffed from a shift that wouldn't last heart-heavy, because I knew she was tired. I pushed the side door open and stepped into a world that didn't want me there. Richard stepped out of his private elevator, smooth as a blade, shoes hitting the marble like a metronome the whole building obeyed. He didn't look at me, didn't need to. He looked at the table Elena had just polished until you could shave in it. He set down his briefcase, lifted his cup, and with the softest flick of his wrist, he poured coffee across the glass and watched it spill over the edge into the pale rug, a dark river cutting through someone else's work. Then that thin smile like a paper cut. It seems you missed a spot. Elena flinched, the color draining from her face, hands trembling like a bird trying not to be seen. Yes, sir, I'll fix it. She reached for a cloth and I felt something rise in my chest that had my father's voice attached to it. There are moments to stay quiet, son, and there are moments to stand your ground. Funny how the old words live in you like live wires humming until the day you need to grab on. I stepped forward. It was like the room stopped breathing. My voice came out before I could second guess it. You should apologize. Pattern interrupt. Silence. Not the soft kind, not the safe kind, the kind that makes the air feel heavier. Richard turned and looked at me like I was a math problem he hadn't expected to solve at that hour. Do you have any idea who you're speaking to? I held his eyes because if I looked away once, I'd never look back. And I told him what I could defend, even in the court of my own ribs. I know what I saw. You humiliated my wife. Across the room, the housekeeper, Margaret, froze with a dust cloth in her hand. Two other staff stood still, the way deer do just before they bolt. Even the city outside felt like it leaned closer to hear the verdict. Richard's smile tightened by 0.5 millimeter. He glanced at Elena, then at the coffee, then at the rug. And the king rendered his judgment, clean it properly this time. He walked away, the metronome kept time, and Elena bent to her knees with a quiet apology to the air. If it were you, what would you have done? In the elevator ride down, Elena gripped my arm so hard her nails left half moons. David, please, we can't lose this job. Not now, not like this. The smell of coffee clung to her sleeves. The shine of tears in her eyes never fell, and I promised I would try to stay quiet. I meant it. Trying not to be yourself in a place designed to punish you for being yourself is a strange kind of promise. It breaks you in pieces you can't name, and no one hears it crack but you. The next evening, I waited by the service door like a shadow. Told myself I would only walk her home. The side door opened, I stepped in, and the tests began, small, petty, surgical, the instruments of a man who knows that erosion, hurts more than impact. A window, he said, had a smudge, though the glass was so clear it stole the skyline and made it its own. A book, he said, angled wrong by an inch. A clock, he said, ticked too loudly for a refined room. Elena moved with the choreography of survival, the kind that keeps your head low and your job just above the waterline. I stood and told myself that sometimes calm is love, that sometimes silence is protection, you know what I mean. Then he set the trap that reveals the game. A crystal vase balanced on the edge of a console, one careless sweep away from disaster. The kind of thing you see and feel in your bones before you understand why. Elena saw it, and Richard leaned in the doorway of his office with his arms folded. A spectator who had paid for front row seats. Careful, he said. I'd hate to lose something so valuable. The words dropped like feathers and cut like razors. Elena guided the vacuum head around the base of the table, slow as prayer, a bead of sweat sliding down her temple, the room holding its breath while she threaded the needle. When she finished and pulled back, a relief washed through her shoulders, a wave that lasted exactly one heartbeat. Richard walked over, lifted the vase with 2 fingers, and set it back at the center where it belonged, like he had always decided where danger sits and where relief begins. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Message received. That was the night of the piano. The grand in the corner black lacquer reflecting a version of the room that looked truer than the room itself. Richard gestured to it like a magician revealing the final trick, polish every key individually, front, top, sides. I expect brilliance. Elena stared at the 88 teeth of labor waiting for her and went pale. Sir, there are 88 keys that will take hours. Then you had better start, he said, pleased with himself, in the way of a man who doesn't believe time applies to anyone but him. I sat beside her. No, David, please, if he sees you. Let him, I said. I'm not letting you do this alone. So we did it together, key by key, not as servants, but as witnesses, our hands moving in rhythm, each stroke saying, we are not your props. We are not your ghosts. We are 2 people who love each other, and that matters more than the shine on your instrument. Halfway through the office door, eased open, I felt the weight of his gaze from that thin crack. I ignored it. He stepped out, pressed a single key with a gloved finger. A clean note rang out like a judgment bell. He inspected the surface and said impressive in a tone that framed the word as an insult. Then he looked at me. Tell me, do you always clean up after your wife? My back got hot. My voice stayed steady. I stand with my wife. There's a difference. The room tightened around that sentence. Richard smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. If you insist on standing in my arena, let's see how long you last. Pattern interrupt. No shouting match. No dramatic firing, not yet. Instead, a week that felt like walking a minefield with a blindfold every evening. A new little cruelty dressed up as a standard, a smear that didn't exist. A chair half an inch off center. A demand to polish the underside of a shelf no one would ever see. Elena obeyed because obedience pays, and I stood, not loud, not bowed. Simply present, the one thing a bully can't stand is a witness who will not leave. Then came the twist, and I swear to you I didn't see it coming either. Wednesday night, he called us into his office, a room with a view that looked like it charged admission. Mahogany desk city spread across the glass like a map he owned. A leather folder on the desk, thick with papers. He opened it with a showman's hands. You seem eager to prove your worth, he said, smooth, almost friendly, which is a kind of cruelty if you know how to read it. So let's raise the stakes. Contracts, financial reports, a stack of investment pages thick enough to stop a door. This is a deal worth 200 million. If it succeeds, my company gains everything. If it fails. He let the words hang there in the cold air. Perhaps your wife's employment will no longer be necessary. Elena gasped, "Sir. Please, he has nothing to do with this." He raised one hand, and she went quiet like a spell he could cast with a wrist. He slid the papers toward me. It was a trap, and he expected me to drown in it. A mechanic with grease under his nails sat in front of a boardroom puzzle he'd spent a lifetime training for. I'm not a finance guy. I know engines. I know the sound a bad bearing makes before anyone else hears it. I know how a belt slips for a second before it snaps. I know the smell of heat when it's eating a machine from the inside out. But numbers have rhythms too, and if you listen, they will sing. I flipped through because pride is stubborn, and dignity doesn't like being told to sit in the corner. Page 3 had a valuation, page 6 had a summary, and the two didn't sing the same song. One note was off small enough to hide in a room full of notes, but once you hear it, you can't unhear it. 200 million, I said slowly. Finger on the line, that's not accurate, the totals don't match. For a second, I saw it a flicker in his face like a light struggling with a bad connection, gone too fast for anyone who didn't want to see it. Careful, Mr. Brooks, he said. You're treading on ground far above your station. But the damage was done. He'd tried to humiliate me in a language I wasn't supposed to speak. And somehow I understood enough to hear the lie. Numbers don't lie, people do. Stick around, because what happened next will blow your mind. Friday night, he set the stage in the Great Hall, a room designed to make normal people feel smaller. Staff lined the edges, pretending to dust while their eyes told the truth. The city outside glittered like it didn't care either way. He placed the leather folder on a glass table and said, You believe you found a mistake, perhaps you'd like to show everyone. He expected me to choke on the performance to prove him right about men like me staying in our lanes. I didn't give a speech. I didn't pretend to be an expert. I did what a mechanic does. I pointed to the sound the machine made when you turn the key here. Page 3's valuation contradicts page 6's summary. Anyone who runs the numbers will see it. This contract is fraudulent. The word hit the air like a hammer. The staff didn't move, but the whole room tilted 5 degrees toward the folder. Margaret's eyes narrowed in a way I'd only seen when she was deciding whether to tell a truth or keep a job. And then the youngest assistant, a woman with a clipboard and a courage she hadn't used yet, stepped forward, voice trembling and steady. At once, he's right. I checked those numbers last week. I thought I was mistaken. Murmurs like birds lifting off a wire, a whisper network turning into a small chorus, the first chime in a bell tower. You didn't know still worked. For years, fear had been the loudest thing in that room. Suddenly, truth wanted a turn at the microphone. Bold claim, Richard said, jaw tight, smile tighter. And you are what a janitor's husband, a mechanic without a shop. What gives you authority? I looked him in the eye because I had learned the only authority I could count on was the kind you carry in your spine. Truth doesn't need authority. It only needs someone willing to say it out loud. That was the moment the air broke, not with a shout, not with a guard escorting us to the elevator, with something quieter and more dangerous to a man like him, witnesses. Once a staff sees that the emperor can misbutton his shirt, they never stop checking the buttons. He closed the folder slowly. Interesting, he said. Perhaps you're more useful than I thought, then. He dismissed everyone like a director calling cut on a scene that didn't go as planned. No apology, no thank you, just the softest wobble in a tower built on control. The week after that felt different, not fixed, not fair, just different. Orders came down from behind a closed door. More often, the metronome lost its perfect tempo. The staff who used to move like ghosts started to walk like their feet belonged to them again. At home, Elena's shoulders carried less weight. She laughed at a joke so small it would have been invisible to us a month earlier. We made cheap food that tasted like a holiday. We slept through the night with the kind of sleep that lets you forget your teeth are clenched. Then he called me in alone. No Elena, no staff, just me and the view. He wasn't behind the desk, which told me more than a speech could. He sat by the window like he'd been thinking about the horizon and didn't trust it as much as he used to. You should have been broken, he said, not mean, not kind, almost clinical, but you weren't. That makes you dangerous. It doesn't make me dangerous, I told him, it makes me free. You can take jobs, money, even homes, but you can't take a man's will to stand. We were quiet for a long second that felt like more. He nodded once, almost to himself, like a man admitting the weather had changed without his permission. Then he dismissed me. Not an apology, not a handshake, not a miracle, but something close to acknowledgement. I stepped into the hall, and Elena was there, worry and hope fighting in her eyes. She slipped her hand into mine, and we walked out together. Not ghosts anymore, just two people who remembered their worth. So what is this really about? It's not about a coffee stain. It's not even about a contract with bad math. It's about the rooms where people decide that fear is a faster tool than respect, where silence is called professionalism, where power says jump and everyone asks how high, because rent is due and kids need shoes. Do you think that's fair? Or do you think that maybe the cost of a clean room kept by fear is a little too high for the humans inside it? I'm not pretending this is simple. I know speaking up is expensive. I know sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just survive. I know we don't all get the arc of a tidy story. But I also know this: the first time a room hears a true sentence spoken clean, the walls remember it. And the next time fear tries to take the microphone, it has to speak a little louder to drown it out. If it were you standing there watching someone with a key card and a corner office build small traps for the people who clean their floors, what would you have done? Would you keep your head down, tell yourself it isn't your fight? Or would you pick a moment, just one, and say a sentence you could defend in the court of your own ribs? I'm not asking because I want a medal. I'm asking because I want to know what kind of rooms we want to work in, and live in rooms where truth is a liability, or rooms where it's a standard, rooms built on obedience, or rooms built on dignity. Yeah, that happened. I told a billionaire to apologize, and somehow the book didn't end on that page. It kept going. It got messy. It got human. It made me angrier and softer at the same time, more tender with my wife, and less patient with men who own the sky. Here's the part that might start a fight in the comments, and maybe it should. I don't know if Richard is a changed man. I doubt it. Men like that don't turn on a dime, they drift. They adapt where they must. They shore up walls no one can see. The board he answers to probably heard whispers about a folder with mismatched totals. Maybe they cared. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they called it a rounding error and poured a better drink. But the staff saw it, and you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unhear your own courage when you finally use it. The empire of silence cracked, not shattered, but cracked, and through the crack, a little air got in. Sometimes that's what change looks like, not a flood, just a draft that lets a room breathe. So I'm going to ask you for something, and I mean this. Tell me what you think. If it were you, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet to keep your family safe? Or would you have stepped forward and risked the rent? Do you think I was reckless or right? Do you think truth without authority still counts in rooms built on hierarchy? Drop your story in the comments. Tell me about the time someone tried to break you with power and you stood anyway. Even just a little "tell me if you think fear makes better work," or just quieter people. Share this with someone who needs to remember their spine hit subscribe, because the next time someone spills a cup of coffee just to watch you clean it, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember your voice, and I want you to remember that silence can be policy, but it doesn't have to be your choice.